So
Is it?
I was intending on live streaming this
Yeah.
conversation
Yeah.
to Facebook Live and on a few of our pages. Just wanted to
Yeah.
confirm that's okay with you. Alternatively, I could record it and then post it.
No, I'm happy to stream. I just
Because
need to.
if I
I'm
do stream it live, I can always take it down afterwards if there's anything you'd like edited. So
Yeah, no, that's good. I mean, I just think the message of the new Barbarians is powerful. We just have to be careful about the timing. And so I may touch on it, but I don't want to make it I don't want to reveal all of it before it's time, if you know what I'm saying.
absolutely, no, yeah, no, I so much hope and so much life. Um, you know what's happening today. I have a series of interviews that basically one after another, where I'm interviewing different friends. This was an idea I thought of. So I'm intermingling people who are, like working in really cool nonprofits on the ground, doing work on the ground. My friends at Salvation Army, I'm interviewing them, and others who are more
Yeah.
in a startup mode. They're much smaller. And then I'm intermingling that with a few people who inspire me as leaders and who model biblical generosity. And we're celebrating Giving Tuesday, celebrating generosity. So that's kind of the context, but
Hmm.
um,
And how do
we
you
can
see the
go
Roman
anywhere we
thing?
want with that.
How do you see the Roman thing fitting in with the giving thing? Or just so I
Generosity.
understand.
Yeah, no, like a core value of the new barbarians is generosity, and a core value of the Roman system has been, the opposite: greed, selfishness.
Yeah.
Um, but I mean, you're setting the stage. What I really liked about how the thing works out is like, oh, you can kind of frame the whole day. Like I think one thing that I keep thinking about and trying to convince people on is you've got the wrong narrative. Here in America, we're so afraid of a Marxist takeover, and people are like really afraid of it. And it's like that's the wrong metaphor.
Yeah.
That's not happening. And we need to, our fear makes us blind to our own shortcomings.
Hmm.
So
Okay. Well, let's make it a conversation, so it doesn't
let's make it a
become too much of a
conversation. So
so it doesn't become too much of a preach from me, as it were.
no,
But
I'm all
yeah.
for you preaching. So you can preach all you want. All right, let me go. Let me go on. And at one point, we can see how many people are following us. All right, you're freezing up again. Can you hear me?
I can
You're
hear you.
intermingling between looking.
You're freezing for me. I've got you on a super quick channel.
Is that
Do you want me
good?
to try? Yeah, you're better. Do
You're
you want me to
fine.
put?
It is. I do not think it's on your side. And you're
Okay.
intermingling between a super crisp picture and then me freezing. So I think you're fine. Um, which means if I'm frozen, it's probably just me and you're still good.
Do you
Let me
want
go.
to? Do you want to dial in by phone to your line and then mute your internet audio, and then even if the picture goes, we'll still be connected by telephone to the sound.
Very good idea. Let me
And
see
then
how to do that.
if you want to separately record the audio, at least you have the audio. Even
Yeah,
if the
no,
internet
I'm
goes down.
recording this and I'm recording it to the cloud. So we'll have your video and the
Yeah.
audio.
So
I'm also locally
if you're telephoning
recording
in,
myself. Yeah.
then the cloud will capture that even if the internet goes down, right? That's what I do
Yeah.
when I have a bad line. The old tech sometimes is the best.
Yeah. Yep. Here we go. Join the meeting. See if this works. Okay. So what do I need to do? Am I getting double?
Nope, you sound good to me. You may have to join on a particular line. Did you do that?
Can you talk again?
Hello,
Oh,
hello,
I know
hello.
what's
Can you
going
hear
on
me?
here. This
Can you hear me all right?
This is the issue.
Yeah, you muted yourself, but you may not have silenced the computer because
Yeah,
you're now getting the line. Yeah.
Just a second. I got that. Okay. Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
All right. And I can hear you. And I need to, how do you hide a non-video participant?
Under more.
Yeah, there we go. All right, there we go. Okay, we're good, right? You can hear me, I can hear you.
I can hear
you.
you.
I am going to now go live on Facebook.
It's a good feeling.
Yeah. Okay, let me see. Here we go. Yeah. Preparing live streaming pure preview. All right, Lord Way,
How's it going, Ted?
I believe we are on live now, and that's exciting. Let me do something. Oh, here, I have to give the title now. Okay.
Good. Is everything good with you?
I believe we are. So, Lord Nat Way, I believe we're live. And Facebook, I think you are watching us live now. I think it's now. Yep. I believe that now we are live. So this is Ted Hahs. This is my first interview in a series of interviews today, celebrating Giving Tuesday and celebrating biblical generosity. And my first one is with a guy I'm a big fan of, Lord Nat Way. So, Lord Way, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah. Well, I I live here in the UK in London, and for 10 years I've been working in our House of Lords, which is sort of the equivalent of your Senate, although I'm not technically elected. I'm appointed for life. And so historically, I've done a lot of work in both business, technology, and then also in government as well. And it's just great to celebrate Giving Tuesday with you, and just to remember. I recall so many of my American friends that you have such a culture of giving. I want to honor you all for that, far more even than here in the UK. And it just astounded me over the years to see how much of a giver nation you are. So I thank God for that, and it's great to see you, Ted. You're one of the most generous people I know. So it's a delight and honor to be with you. on this live stream right now.
Well, that's very encouraging. You're mentioning America as a giving nation, and I'm inspired by all the stories of the mission movement. I mean, yeah, the Lord used America powerfully, but we got a lot of that from England. The mission movement that came out of England, Hudson Taylor. And not a lot of people know the story of Hudson Taylor, the missionary to China, but you have a marketplace minister behind him, Guinness, who was his supporter, sending him there, and he was also a minister, but in the marketplace. So we initially met when I was with Dr. Ed Tavoso and Transform Our World. And I was impressed with you and your vision as a reformer. And there's another who's a hero of yours, William Wilberforce. So why don't you tell us what you're doing and how you see that connected with the legacy of William Wilberforce.
Well, Wilberforce is one of the greats in British political history, obviously the story of abolishing slavery. I've also been inspired by another contemporary of his, maybe a little bit later, called the 7th Earl of Shaftesbury. He was actually an aristocrat. He was an earl, although he had been an MP as well when he was younger, who very much felt the pain and the poverty around him from a beach. He had a Christian nanny, I think, who raised him in the faith. And he dedicated the whole of his life to tackling social problems around poverty. So reforming mental asylums, helping to reduce children's factory hours. So back in his day, this is the late sort of 1800s, sort of late 19th century, half of the 19th century, children working 14 hours regularly in mines and factories. So he managed to get that reduced to 10 hours. And ultimately, the child labor was abolished in most cases. And then he helped to get chimney sweeping by miners abolished. So they were sending children up the chimneys, which was very bad for their lungs. They'd often die young. And then, but he was very systemic. You know, when all these kids had to, and their families needed to feed themselves, what he actually helped to organize for kids to get trained up in shoe shining as social enterprises, so that they could then learn and make a trade from shining shoes. And later got the Navy to donate decommissioned ships to train the older kids in trades, so carpentry, plumbing, that kind of thing, so that they could go to the New World, to America, to Australia, and start a new life, but have an actual, way to earn a living. So he was incredibly prolific. And then obviously, as a Christian dedicated to faith, he was involved in missions around the world, India, overseeing the Bible Society, which helped with translations and getting, the copies of the Bible out to different places around the world. He even brought in legislation to make it legal to worship in non-religious buildings, because in his day, if you worshipped in a theater or in a warehouse, that would be regarded as a finable or potentially imprisonable offense. So anywhere in the world which has influence under historically British law, common law, where it is legal to worship outside of a traditional church building, we have him to thank for that. You probably didn't know that, but so 60, 70 initiatives in his lifetime. When he died, many of the poor people in London, 500,000 people turned up to watch his funeral carriage go through London, from East London, the poor part of London, to Westminster Abbey. An incredible guy. So I've been very inspired by that journey. He was sort of...
So he was later than Wilberforce.
Yeah, so Wilberforce was sort of more like the first half of the that century, and then there's a little bit of crossover. I think Wilberforce died just as Shaftesbury was starting to really come into his kind of the height of his reform work. Yeah, and he set up schools, the ragged schools, to create affordable education, for the children in the slums. So just an incredible guy, a real philanthropist, a real giver, not just of money, but of his time and his intellect. He got a first, so he's smarter than me. He got the top, I guess you'd call it like a 3.0 GPA? Is that like your the highest grade that you can get?
No, in America, it's 4.0, the highest
4.0,
GPA.
sorry. So he got the equivalent of 4.0 at university. Super smart guy. They wanted him in government. He refused to be a minister because he felt it would compromise his ability to operate as a reformer. Very smart guy, but he used everything.
So he was an
that God gave him.
aristocrat, but didn't go into government. So he worked as a businessman and as a reformer.
Well, he inherited land from his father, which he had to look after. And one of the first things he did when he inherited the land was to refurbish the homes. They had certain homes set aside for the poor called almshouses. He made sure that they were good so he could look after the widows, and tried, had to sell some of his family's paintings just to afford to do that kind of thing. Yeah, so as an aristocrat, you obviously have your land and you have your animals, and that's how he kind of paid his way. And then he used his time that was freed up from not having to run those businesses day to day to be a parliamentarian, to engage in bringing reform to the nation. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. That's so cool. What do you know? William Booth and the Salvation Army. It sounds like they were birthed around the time.
Yeah, it's relatively similar. Again, I think the Salvation Army reached the height of what they were doing back in that era, just a decade or two after Shaftesbury, and but there was some, I think, crossover from the early years of Booth and the Salvation Army, and I'm familiar with that story as well. So I think whilst Shaftesbury was reaching the north of the nation, some of the poorer communities, and the mainstream, as he was sort of making it more acceptable for faith to be expressed in the marketplace, in the public sphere, I think the Salvation Army were very much saying the role of the church isn't just to, be in these buildings and to worship and to reach a fairly literate population, but it's actually to make faith accessible to people, who may or may not know how to read, who love popular songs. So they were the guys that took the pop songs of the day and put Christian lyrics to it. So really made it, accessible to people. They'll be like the equivalent of rappers today, on Instagram or whatever. Making
It's the
Christianity
gospel
accessible.
rappers. It's so fun.
Yeah.
I mentioned I could interviewing my friends from Salvation Army, Major. So this afternoon, they're at the other end of the day, and they're a fascinating Francisco story too. So they're probably one of the oldest churches in San Francisco, and that's really cool. Wow, the history and the connection, how each generation builds upon the last and innovates, and it's very, very inspiring. Yeah, you have a book you can recommend that tells about his story? Everyone's familiar, many more are familiar with Wilberforce than with this reformer you just mentioned.
There are many books, but the one that's my favorite is called The Poor Man's Earl, EARL, by John Pollock. It's actually out of print, I think, but you can get it in secondhand bookshops and online.
John Pollock. How do you spell John Pollock?
So John, John, and then Pollock, Pollack, I think. That book changed my life when I read it. It kind of
really
set me on the path that I've been on for all these years, for about 15 years now. Yeah.
And tell me again the time frame of when he was working, when he was active.
So he is a late Victorian. So let me just Google. I'll tell you his exact.
And I'm putting this in the comments so people are interested.
Yeah. So he was born. Have I got this right? 1801, and he died in 1885. So he was most active, in his 20s and 30s as an MP, and then later as a member of the House of Lords. So from about the second half of the beginning of the century through to towards the end of the 1800s, that's when he was active. And I think Wilberforce was a bit earlier than that, wasn't I? I could be wrong. Wilberforce was 1759, died 1833. So actually Wilberforce kind of came to the end of his career just as Shaftesbury was turning 30. So there's a tiny bit of overlap.
Shaftesbury. How do you spell his name again? I'm putting it in the comments for viewers who are watching.
Shaftes.
HSAS.
Yeah, I've put it in the chat, and it's specifically the seventh Earl. Seventh Earl of Shaftesbury. Yeah.
That's fascinating. And then I'm thinking, you said your life was changed when you read that book. Life was changed by reading the book of Rees Howes, which is interesting that he was he was part of the Welsh revival. He was in his 20s in 1904, which means he would have died. He would have been born right around when this Earl
Yeah, I think the Earl probably died. I think he died about 16 years beforehand, but the impact that the Earl had persisted into the 20th century. One of the sad things, though, a lesson to learn, is that many of the children or the grandchildren or great-grandchildren of these famous reformers in the Victorian time, many of whom were sent off to schools. I think in Victorian times, children were to be seen and not heard. They didn't yet have a concept of no junior Holy Spirit, that children could be as part of of kingdom building as much as adults. So sadly, a lot of those children, because the parents were so busy saving the world, ended up turning away from the faith, engaging in artistic movements and social economic movements that kind of in the 20th century were took God out of the picture, if you like. And that's really sad. So one lesson that we've had to learn, certainly my family, is you may be called to change the world, but you're also called to bless your family, to be present, to build an ecclesia as a family, because it's as important to look after the next generation, enable them to be released into the destiny that they have, as it is to look after your generation, and the needs that are around you today. So it's that balance between time travel, changing the future through the next generation, as well as changing the now. So they got a lot of things right, these Victorian reformers and these philanthropists, but there are also a lot of things we can learn from their experience that we can build on and go further than them.
What a lesson. What a lesson. Yeah, no, I mean, the whole, one of my life verses has been Malachi 4, 5, and 6. And before that great and dreadful day of the Lord, I will send the prophet Elijah, and he will turn the hearts of the fathers to the children, children to the fathers, lest I strike the land with total devastation. And a very, very last passage of the Old Testament. And the last thing the Holy Spirit said, and the next thing was him speaking to John the Baptist's mother or father, and telling him, it's like, what a setup, what a context, the most important thing. Wow, very inspiring. So tell me more about, you're a young man. Give me more of your story. You read this book and this is your life?
Yeah, I read this book. I had been working in business at McKinsey for 3 years, and I had been engaged in the nonprofit world. So I helped to set up with others the equivalent of Teach for America in the UK. It's called Teach First, to encourage young people from university to, teach for a few years, but also to have the opportunity to go into business afterwards, or government, or whichever, fast track career. So I really enjoyed that. I spent 3 years doing that. So I'd been working for 6 years, mainly in London and around.
So
And then I
you're
did some.
starting out your career. So there's a college at the point, or
No, I'd finished college. I'd done 3 years at McKinsey, and then I'd done 3 years starting up this nonprofit with others. And then I spent 6 months in venture capital, because that was what had one of the paths I had been exploring before entering the nonprofit world. And then McKinsey, my first employer, who had generously, speaking of generosity, said you can be out as long as 4 years and come back with or without an MBA, and we'll take you back, which meant that I could go and do risky things like setting up nonprofits. They finally said, it's been 4 years, are you coming back? And so I had to really make a choice at that point. I could, I had to make a choice. So I happened to be in my church leader's office, sort of hanging around, and he gave me this book, and I read it, and I was so inspired, and it really connected at a spirit level with what I had been doing, setting up this nonprofit, and realizing that, you can continue that social reform stuff today, maybe with technology and with different, stuff that we know today, but you could do it in the same spirit to see, the world transformed, and to help people. And so I eventually, this was confirmed New Year's Day 2006. Someone was preaching at a church I was visiting from Esther, for such a time as this, and basically said, this is 2 years before the financial crisis, that a season is coming where the world will be shaken. The things that seem permanent and which would never change will be rocked. And there'll be many crises, he said prophetically. And that people, men and women of God, will need to rise up again, like Esther did, to avert the crisis of the day, whether it's a Holocaust or some other crisis. And he went through many biblical examples, and then he listed out names in the modern era: Wesley, Whitfield, Shaftesbury. And the moment he said Shaftesbury, that was a confirmation. I felt, yeah, we should do this as a family. So said to McKinsey, I'm not coming back. And really from then I embarked on the lifestyle, the calling of being a social, today we might call it a social entrepreneur, a social innovator. Back then in the Victorian era, they called it a social reformer. And so I have to split my time between business, government, cultivating initiatives that can change the world in different spheres. And eventually, through an organization I set up called the Shaftesbury Partnership, we had the chance to design nonprofits and for-profits that have an impact on society. And we got to do that for the previous prime minister before he was elected. So 2 years before Cameron became prime minister, we were asked as an organization to create, I guess it's like the equivalent of AmeriCorps for you. So it's called the National Citizenship Service. It's a non-military experience, bringing young kids straight after high school to work in teams, train in the mountains, and then go into their communities and serve their communities. And that was 2 years before he got elected. And then 1 year before he got elected, partly on the back of that and on the back of creating Teach First with others, he invited me to go into the House of Lords, which, given that Shaftesbury had been in the House of Lords, felt like the right path to continue the journey of being a social transformer, if you like. And that was 10 years ago when I went in.
Oh, okay. So your role in the House of Lords is pretty unique too, right?
Yeah, there's a number of different.
Weren't you the youngest member of the House of Lords?
Yeah,
I heard.
Yeah, I'm not the youngest now.
Well,
I think
that
there's
was
a couple
10 years ago. Yeah.
Couple of ladies who've come in who are younger. But yeah, when I entered, I was the youngest ever who had not come from an aristocratic background. So obviously there was, before, certainly in Shaftesbury's era, everybody in the House of Lords was inherited that position generally, because it was an aristocratic house. And then they changed that system over the last sort of 70 years and 20 years. So most of us now are there for our lives until we die, and we don't pass it to our children generally. And yeah, so when I entered, I was the youngest.
How do you get elected into the position now?
You get technically, officially, you're appointed by the Queen, but you're recommended by either the Prime Minister or one of the political party leaders. So normally either for service to a political party or to the nation or to business. And the whole idea is to create a house that has expertise, so we can challenge the elected house on some of their thinking about the laws, so that, you know, we in our house, we have people who've seen the previous recessions way back, you know, to the 70s and 80s. So hopefully some of that knowledge can help us as we design measures to tackle the financial crisis that's coming because of COVID. You know, so there's wisdom. I kind of call it like the Wikipedia of law for Britain.
Yeah.
And our role is mainly to amend the laws to make them hopefully more practical. And, you know, sometimes you create a law because of a crisis in a rush, in a hurry, and we're certainly arguably doing a lot of that now because of COVID. And sometimes it's good to have people who make you think twice. You know, is it going to work?
Yeah,
what are the implications of it, etc.? Yeah.
You asked me earlier before we went on about my wife, the update, and I appreciate your concern there. And yeah, she's doing really well. And for those who may not know the story, she was through 9 months of an undiagnosed condition and went to all these different doctors. And then after 9 months, on the 14th doctor, Christian, who, you know, is one of these integrated people, who's a missionary in the marketplace as a doctor doing medicine under the power of the Holy Spirit. She diagnosed her really cool with pernicious anemia, and it's turned around since then. It's been God is so good. But I bring that up because you mentioned the rules and the laws that we're making because of COVID. They are doing an amazing work down in downtown San Jose with service working workers, Spanish speaking. And so they're right on the front lines. They've been there for years, so they have deep relationships. Yep. And but tough. The poverty pandemic that has caused by our reaction to COVID. I mean, for you and me and most of my peers, COVID was tough. It was a challenge depending on your mental state. A lot of times there's a lot of good, you know, you're forced in with your family. That a lot of good comes out of that. But for the poor, it's been just devastating. You know, like their entire community on March 17th, 100% of them lost their jobs.
Yeah. And also there's sadly a higher rate of COVID infection and deaths for lower income communities. You know, the number of friends I've got from lower income backgrounds who have lost friends and loved ones to COVID because of health and other factors, you know, and people's exposure to working outdoors and so on. It's had that impact as well, not just economic, but health-wise as well. Yeah. And then what people don't understand, not only are they being hit disproportionately to the COVID, I mean, praise God now, at least in Santa Clara, where I know more as far as the details. Initially, there was no testing, really, because if they're uninsured. So now they've at least addressed those issues. They're doing a little bit better. But the health related to poverty too, you know, like violence, mental illness, and then the side effects of not being able to get treatment for other things that aren't essential. It's a real challenge. So a lot of work still to be done. So what's next? What's next for you? What's next for our world? You know, think about a few more minutes here to talk. So. Yeah, you've asked me the biggest question when I've got the least time to answer. I'll try my best.
Well, you know, I'm hoping I'll have to sign you up for another interview.
I think as we go into 2021, one of the things I've been writing about in the last year since COVID started is the need to rebuild, but to rebuild in a way that is more resilient I think one of the things that we've seen with COVID is how fragile our societies are. You know, we've seen all the unrest and so on. We've seen how fragile our institutions are. How fragile our healthcare systems are. You know, so much of what we call government today is very centralized. And when you hit it with a virus, these centralized systems break, because there are lots of, you know, in the UK, I don't know about America, but we are doing everything we can at great economic cost and social and mental health costs to protect three institutions: our care homes, our schools, and our hospitals. Unfortunately, the three places where you're most likely to get COVID is our hospitals and our schools and our care homes. So we're fighting to protect systems that are not designed for a time like this. And I yearn for the day, and I'm sure Shastri would have agreed if he was alive today, when, you know, like Star Trek, one day our hospitals are in here. You can get your scans and a lot of your healthcare either in a phone or in a truck outside your house. So we don't have to take the risk of infecting others or being infected in these centralized huge buildings that cost a lot of money. Same for schooling. You know, our schooling has not been ready for schooling at home or schooling in the community. You know, so I think there's a period to come where we kind of have to go, well, we've had our Dunkirk, we've suffered, you know, in the first battles in this war. How do we make sure next time we don't suffer the same effect by building a more resilient society that's ultimately centered more around community, more around ecclesia? You know, you talk about the medical clinic, where you could take out one clinic, but the other ones still survive. You know, whereas if you take out one hospital, the whole region suffers because that one hospital served the whole region. So making things work more like the internet works, decentralized, is something that I'm passionate about. And then I think some of this is about, you know, I think I want to reassure your viewers. I don't think we are in an era analogous to the lead up to the First World War. I don't think we're about to see, you know, global dictatorships and all of this stuff. I don't see that. What I see is a lot of global centralized institutions and some national ones collapsing, because in the age of the internet, they're just not fit for purpose. You know, they're like trying to drive, you know, a car from 100 years ago in an age of Teslas. You know, they just don't work. Yeah. And as these things collapse, as they get decommissioned, we then have to kind of go, what next? And the last time this happened, arguably, was the Roman Empire falling. You know, this global system that controlled everything and that tried to make you think like a Roman all the time. And it's like saying, no, we're coming out of that. And interestingly, the hundreds of years after that empire fell, we saw the growth of the monasteries. And it was the barbarians that sort of took charge of the world after the Romans. And I guess the defining question, and I'll leave you with this, it's something I'm doing writing and thinking about, is not, should I be a Roman or a barbarian? You know, should I be someone that still thinks in this mindset of everyone has to be the same everywhere in the world? Or, you know, am I someone that is led by my heart first and has a passion to see justice restored? And it's not that. That's not the defining question. The world that's coming is going to be a barbarian world, whether you like it or not. It's going to be more local. It's going to be much more about the heart and authenticity. It's going to be much more about, you know, systems that are decentralized. But are you going to be a good one or a bad one? That's the question. Are you going to be a terrorist, a far right or far left, you know, kind of person that just kills everybody on social media? Or are you going to be a St. Patrick, a Columba, a Wilberforce, a Shaftesbury, a Martin Luther King, you know, these people who used both their heart and their head to see the world transformed and to create sanctuaries and places that people could take refuge, even as the world as we know it crumbles around us, both online worlds as well as offline worlds. And that's something I'm really excited to usher in as we go into the next few years.
Well, I really like the theme that brought out what a way to end. And I had a thought until just now, you know, the connection, you know, we talked about Wilberforce and then Shaftesbury and then Rees Howells and then William Booth, you know, this whole continuum. you said the area that we need, one specific area we need to learn is to impart our values to the next generation. But the foundation of those guys were, the saints, the early saints that came to England with St. Patrick, and the incredible things they did to bring the gospel there initially, and to see how the foundation in each generation has built upon it. And what I keep telling everybody is, this crisis, obviously 2020 was defined by crisis. It's challenging, but it's not like it started these things. It exacerbated, accelerated issues that were already happening.
That's right.
And we, particularly as followers of Jesus, need to look beyond the crisis, stop looking back, and see the opportunities that are ahead of us. And the overall terms are really, it's opportunity. That's one of the things I see. Now's the time to move forward. And we need those who aren't shrieking back because of fear, but are investing and really investing what's most important, the people.
And it's time to have courage, right? A good barbarian is just as courageous as a terrifying, Viking or whatever Visigoth barbarian. But the key difference is love. So the good barbarian, your St. Patrick's, one of the hallmarks was that they loved their enemies and they loved those who had need. And I think if we can exemplify that in the coming years, then we have a chance. We have a chance to see the world going on a path that isn't just, a bad one, where destruction is inevitable. We can go on a path where good can come out of the broken pieces of a world that, has been falling for a long time. To COVID is just completing the process. I'm afraid I need to run to another call, but it's been so good to talk to you.
No, thank you so much for your time. This has been dramatic. I'd like to do, this has been awesome. Yeah, and I look forward to doing it again. I love you so much and really admire your thinking. You always inspire me. Thank you for your time. And folks, post something in the questions. I'll ask them in our next interview. All right, so thank you so much.
Great.
God bless you.
Bless you.
All right.
Take care.
Okay, bye.